The psychedelic revolution is here. If you want to integrate your visionary experiences into your purpose, get clear on your entrepreneurial path, and help people while you do what you love, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to The Psychedelic Entrepreneur, Medicine for These Times. I'm your host, Beth Weinstein. I'm a spiritual business coach, 3-time entrepreneur, and a lifelong student of psychedelics and sacred plant medicines. You carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times. This podcast will help you to share your medicine so you can create transformation in the world. Listen in on conversations with psychedelic leaders, changemakers, and conscious entrepreneurs who are living proof that a better world is possible when you follow your heart and live in alignment with your soul. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Today, I'm really excited to have our guest, Alexander Beiner, coming to us from the UK. Hi, Alexander. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Beth. Thanks for having me.
So if you don't know Alexander's work, Alexander is an author and podcaster, and he's one of the founders of the media and events platform Rebel Wisdom. And he's also executive director of Breaking Convention, Europe's longest-running conference on psychedelic medicine and culture. His upcoming book, The Bigger Picture, How Psychedelics Can Help Us Make Sense of the World, is being published by Hay House next year. This book explores how psychedelics could transform culture and society. He has a particular interest on how psychedelic experiences can be applied to systems change and improving how we have conversations around difficult cultural topics. He has also covered psychedelic capitalism journalistically for a number of years, with a particular focus on the ways in which economic and cultural incentive structures interact with the transformative potential of psychedelic medicines. Trained as a counselor and a meditation teacher, Alexander also runs retreats centered on combining practices drawn from cognitive science, the wisdom traditions, and psychedelic philosophy to create powerful group experiences. He facilitates legal psychedelic retreats in the Netherlands in partnership with Awaken the Medicine Within, which is how I found him. Co-developed with the UK's leading men's work process through Rebel Wisdom, and has designed a number of popular online courses focused on sense-making, embodiment, and conversational practices. He has a particular interest in the phenomenology of psychedelic experience and how we can combine ritual, practice, and collective intelligence to expand consciousness in new ways. And actually, Alexander, I had known about your work through Rebel Wisdom and also Breaking Convention, which was one of the original psychedelic conferences out there. But I would love to know, and I love this path you're on because it's quite similar to mine, the meditation path. I come from a Buddhist background and, of course, psychedelics as well. I would love to know, how did you turn this into your career? Like, what was your original path when you were young? And I always like to make this joke. Were you on the path of becoming, a corporate lawyer or something like that?
Do you know what? It's such a funny thought for me to think of psychedelics as a career, but I suppose that is now kind of true. So I grew up in near Frankfurt in Germany, and that's about 2.5 hours from the south of Holland, where mushrooms were, well, still, and truffles certainly are legal, but mushrooms were legal when I was growing up. And so I used to, enjoy smoking weed when I was sort of like, 17, 18. So we used to drive to Holland quite frequently and buy weed and then drive home. And then mushrooms were also, that was something that I was sort of aware of. My brother was definitely a big influence on me as well. My brother is, was always really into philosophy. I knew about psychedelics through him. And then when I was 18, we went up to Maastricht in Holland and had my first mushroom trip. And I just felt an immediate sense of homecoming, like complete homecoming is the best way I can describe it. And felt that it was very important. I just felt it was very important, the experience, not just my experience, but the experience for everyone.
I actually have some questions regarding the topics that you talk about in your book, because this is an area that, clearly with my podcast and the work that I do has always been of interest to me as well. The first time I did psychedelics, I was 14 years old, and I just knew with that experience, I could feel and tell that there was much more possible. Like there's more than we know. There's potential implications for our society, for creating, like you talk about in your bio, systems change, cultural change, transformation. Let's get into this. What is the premise of the book and what is it about? And then we'll go into some more specifics because I have a lot of questions about, how psychedelics could actually affect our entire planet.
The premise of the book is that the psychedelic experience contains within it the very same skills and ways of being and insights that we need to make sense of the very complex, weird, dangerous world we live in right now. So in some ways, we're on a kind of collective trip, right? We're in a collective process. That might always be true, but certainly right now we have what I call the big crisis, which, a lot of people call the meta crisis, which is just the multiple overlapping huge problems that we face as a species that are all happening at once. So obviously we have the environmental crisis. We have increasing rates of political polarization. We have a crisis of meaning, especially at the heart of consumer culture, where we have no real sense of what we're living for, particularly in Western secular countries. There's a God-shaped hole. We have technology that's increasing at an exponential rate, but don't really have the wisdom of how to use it properly. We have a mental health crisis. All of it is happening at the same time. We, of course, have now inflation and economic crises happening. So we're living through this period where we have some massive, massive problems. They are complex problems, which is different to a complicated problem. Difference is that, if something's complicated, like a grandfather clock, you just go inside it and you figure out which bit is missing and you fix it. And then the whole thing works. A lot of our policies and our attitudes to fixing our big problems are that same attitude. We're like, okay, well, maybe if we recycle, or maybe if we just cut carbon, or maybe if we do this, or whatever it might be, it'll fix it. But we don't realize that actually what we're dealing with is something that's complex. We're dealing with something that's constantly changing as we're trying to make sense of it. And in a complex system, like an anthill, for example, it's actually the interaction of multiple different parts that create something more than the sum of its part. So with that in mind, basically, one of the things psychedelics do, I think, is give us a lived experience of complexity and a lived experience of being part of an interconnected, complex system. So that's one element, but also the actual skills that we need to navigate the psychedelic experience: discernment, presence, mindfulness, a real sense of curiosity and self-compassion, a kind of resilience as well, because psychedelic experiences are hard and they're dangerous. So all of these things are the same skill sets that we need to be able to navigate the situation that we find ourselves in, that I was just describing. So that's really the main thesis of the book. And underneath that, I explore as well, in particular, the internet, because in a way, this experience that we're having of, like, picking up our phones 500 times a day and diving into a different reality that is run by different rules and different constraints. And it's a place where nothing is quite as it appears, and the way people present themselves on social media isn't quite really what their life is like. It's a place where algorithms dictate what we're seeing, where we have heightened emotion, where we have heightened mythical thinking and fantasy, and all of that is very shamanic in a lot of ways, and by which I mean it's a very psychedelic place to be, the internet. And we need to learn how to navigate the internet much, much better than we are right now. So that's another thing I explore. And then finally, at the much deeper level of, well, looking at all those crises that we're facing, I'm always curious about, and I think many people are, well, what is underlying them and what do we do about it? And where one of the things that I'm particularly keen on is, and after 5 years through Rebel Wisdom of speaking to what may be the best systems thinkers in the world and some of the smartest people in the world, is that the problem that we have is metaphysical. Like, we can think of designing new systems all day long, But if those systems are designed on a view of the world which sees the world as dead matter and people as sort of meat machines wandering around, we might as well quit now, because that's never going to create a world that's going to survive, in my view. Instead, I think the shift has to be really at the deepest level of what is reality and who are we in relation to it. And that's what I think psychedelics can shift more than any other practice that I am aware of, to a degree that is of orders of magnitude different to the shifts we can get through other practices, if, and this is a huge if we use them correctly, if we use them with the right combination of practices, or the right kind of reverence, with the right kind of ritual, with the right kind of ceremony, because they can just as easily take us the other way into a deeper sense of a narrow frame of focus, and a kind of more deeper self-delusion. So that's the big if at the center of the book as well. And I spend a lot of time trying to clarify as best I can, and discern, well, what does it look like to do it as right as we can right now? So yeah, that's it in a big nutshell, let's say.
Beautiful. I'm sitting here smiling, like almost laughing, because I speak about this often where, I believe psychedelics are here for as teachers, right? Like to really, and they're popular at this time for a reason, that's what I believe. To really teach us how to be, you mentioned resilient. I always say, like, to learn how to stay centered in the midst of chaos. Like the pandemic was maybe only the beginning. And I think there's a certain level of awareness that we are not just entering in back to quote normal, that our world is entering into this whole new phase, and Lord knows what's going to happen. But yeah, you just named, a huge amount of the issues that we're already facing as it is, and Lord knows what else is going to come. And these psychedelics, as you said, can be quite challenging. They're not always fun and pretty and, just enjoyable. For me in particular, they seem to actually be more challenging than enjoyable. But it's really just deepened so much that practice of learning how to stay grounded and centered and connected, and have a really deep spiritual practice to know that there's much more here than just, like that little survival and make money just to purchase things and be part of this system that, again, like a lot of us were programmed to just believe, you come here, you're born, you make money, and you die. And it's so much deeper than that. And I'm curious, do you touch upon, or I'm curious what your views are on the root of these issues? Because I speak about that a lot, because, for instance, I help people come into their heart and start businesses. Like that's what I do for my work, essentially. Find some meaning and purpose in our work, because most people, at least here in the Western world, spend a third of our life working. And in my personal opinion, a lot of the depression, anxiety, issues that we're dealing with, the need for people wanting to do ketamine or psilocybin to heal their depression, is actually caused by these deeper systematic roots, which is, people have jobs that they hate. People feel like they have no meaning. They're a slave to society. They're a slave to capitalism. It's keeping up with the Joneses, trying to pay the bills. It's this deeper systematic issue. And I'm curious, do you touch on this? And what do you feel is at the root? Because I personally feel like it's, a spiritual disconnection from self, earth, and spirit. That's just putting that in like one sentence. And of course we could talk for, years about this, but I'm curious, like, do you dive deep into these root causes and maybe potential solutions for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a whole chapter on that. In fact, well, in some ways multiple, but yeah. That's a really good question. What is the root? I mean, I kind of wrestle with this all the time. I don't think there's a single root cause. But I do think there are certain causes which are more significant than others. Starting on one level, a little higher up, the incentive structures of our economic systems are a major factor. And a lot of people we've had in the past on Rebel Wisdom, people like Daniel Schmachtenberger, for example, do a really great job of looking at what's the game theory of the systems we're part of. And game theory is really just the economics of competition. And there's a really great very long but excellent blog post by the blogger Scott Alexander called Meditations on Moloch, which I'd highly recommend people check out. And I think this is a really useful metaphor. So Moloch is a Canaanite deity. It kind of appears in the Bible. It's like a god of war, and Moloch, like people would sacrifice their children to Moloch in order to basically get what be successful in war. But that metaphor is really like, it's a god that asks you to sacrifice that which is most sacred and important to you to get what you want in the material world. And so Allen Ginsberg wrote a poem called Howl, where he used Moloch as a metaphor for not just capitalism, but certainly that, but this sort of force of entropy and extraction in the world, right? Scott Alexander did a great job of expanding that out and applying it to game theory. And one example I use in the book is, imagine you have it's called the multipolar trap, right? Or a race to the bottom, right? Which we're all kind of familiar with. And this really applies to the psychedelic world and psychedelic capitalism massively. When people say, yeah, but there's really good people in the psychedelic pharma companies and VCs, it's like, yeah, sure, there are absolutely. It doesn't matter though, because if the system itself makes it impossible for a single actor to do anything but get with the game or go, then you're screwed.
This is beautiful and slightly depressing what you just shared. It's funny because it came up so much this weekend. I was recently at a psychedelic conference, and of course, the word extractive comes up a lot. It's interesting. My original career was in the apparel industry, and it was one of the most polluting industries. And then when I was there, this idea of organic fabrics came out. And it's kind of the same thing that you just brought up. It's this whole like greenwashing, where actually organic fabrics are actually more destructive to the water systems and utilize more water. But of course, now everybody's like, let's just buy organic and feel better. And it's not actually creating real change. It's potentially actually making things worse, because now people are just buying more, thinking it's okay. So again, like these deeper systematic problems, which I bring up, almost every conversation I've had the past few years is about this, where my prayer is that the more people are looking to work with psychedelics, especially the plant medicines and maybe even the DMTs that are definitely powerful teachers, but we'll have them see that we are actually all interconnected, and to actually give water agency and indigenous cultures and peoples like full sovereignty, or to understand that everything is interconnected, including every single decision you make, which I always say it's the financial decisions, the money decisions, and hopefully these big VCs and entrepreneurs in this space, will somehow get there. It's funny because I was kind of like jokingly hazing some VCs this weekend at the conference, kind of just grilling them on their actual psychedelic experiences. And there was a moment where I'm like, wow, maybe this is kind of scary and unfortunate. And I'm very much like you. I have a lot of mixed feelings about even being in this space. And I'm not even really in this space. I just have this one little niche that it's like I work with a lot of medicine people. But I want to talk to you about this because it is a concern for a lot of listeners. It's a concern for me. There's days where I just want to quit and go live in the jungle and take myself off of anything, and a lot. There are many of those days. But then I know we also have voices that are important in the world to create systematic change. What do you feel is a potential solution, or on our way to a solution in the psychedelic world? Like, how do we come into balance with this place of, hey, there is a demand on planet Earth right now for the plant medicines, for this work. There's a growing demand because of the actual mental health crisis, and this lack of purpose, the lack of meaning, the lack of understanding who we are. There's a literal existential crisis. But then there's like the extraction, the money, the capitalism, the VCs, people are, this, I'm like preaching to the choir here. People making compounds out of, psilocybin to then be able to patent it, to then go sell and make, become the Starbucks of psilocybin. And it is freaking scary. What are your views on trying to get this balance between the the demand and the supply and the powers that be? How do we come to terms with this?
Yeah, so Kat Kanur is the founder of the Oren Project and one of the founders of North Star Pledge, who are looking for finding ways of answering these kind of questions. And Liana Jaluli, who works at MAPS, but also is leading up the North Star Pledge. I've had conversations with them frequently around these topics. And yeah, something Kat said in one of the films I put out around psychedelic capitalism was that, there is always going to be a multitude of different ways that people approach psychedelics. There's going to be really horrific ways, and there's going to be really beautiful, deeply held ways, and there'll be multiples of all of them. I think the most important thing is to ensure, to go back to the metaphor of Moloch, that one way, particularly the venture capitalist funded pharma way, doesn't gain enough power to be able to take over the whole ecosystem. Likewise, I think the same is true of psychiatry. I don't think psychiatry should be holding the reins of the psychedelic renaissance either. I think they should have their hands on the reins, along with spiritual practitioners, along with a well-regulated underground, or something that used to be the underground, something where there's accountability. The problem with the underground is there's no accountability. Some great people working, but there's no way to hold them accountable, and that's always a problem for everyone. And then, indigenous expressions and actual proper indigenous reciprocity that doesn't just involve throwing money at a kind of homogenous group of indigenous people, but recognizing the different needs, wants, different political motivations, different sacred practices, understanding what does it really mean to adopt those practices, what does it really mean to be in reciprocal relationship, which is a relationship, which is an exchange. Like, all of those questions have to be happening, and all of those conversations have to be happening at the same time, in my view. I have a phrase I like called clinics and churches, which I say a lot, which is just the idea, especially that we need clinical approaches and sacred ceremonial religious approaches, because the power dynamics are very important to look at and constantly keep in mind. Why would psychiatry be in charge of the psychedelic renaissance? Because an assumed authority around who is sick and who is well. And certainly the onus is really on psychiatry to prove, I think, can they reliably hold the kind of sacred mystical experiences people are having on psychedelics?
Yeah, this is so well said, and I love that, because it's kind of like, I just keep thinking of this term, like the shadow work, right? It's kind of like, well, it's so much easier to bypass all the really deep, hard stuff that no one wants to look at, but really, to bring it all to the surface, because like you said, we can't get rid of the ego, we can't get rid of the anger, of the desires, of the wanting, the capitalism. I mean, capitalism exists right now, and there is this kind of innate desire, because of, especially here in the Western world, the programming, where it's like, okay, well, we can, because I know I come from this Buddhist path where it was like, oh, I'm not supposed to want this. And I'm like, well, wait a second. But that's actually a form of spiritual bypassing in itself. If I'm not recognizing this deep need, and not only that, but like literal, like core wounding around survival and feeling safe on planet Earth, So you said it right here. This is a topic that's come up a lot for me lately, that I actually bring into a lot of my work, because I'm like, we can't pretend this doesn't exist. In order to change these systems that are totally broken for the planet, we can't just go, I forgot who it was that I talked to. I think it was Rak Razam who had said this. And I had read about this too, where there's, people that are like, oh, we're going to fix the melting glaciers, and, with, putting plastic in there to hold it up, or, whatever they're coming up with. And I'm like, really? Like, you think that's going to be the solution on planet Earth, is we're going to come up with these like 3D printed things to just like stick in places and hope they work? It's like, there's this much deeper layer that, this is my prayer with the medicine work and the psychedelics, is that maybe it will open up these new realms. I mean, I'm curious to know, what are your views on the direction this whole psychedelic movement is going? Because, I have to say, I spent 3 days, 2.5 days at this conference, and majority of the time I was a little depressed. And I actually don't get depressed. I'm very rarely. it did give me hope when I was hanging out with the cool people that believe, that think the way I do. But when I heard some other stories, I was like, whoa, I mean, this is real. And again, like, we have to talk about this, because I keep saying, like, hey, if we don't like the way maybe this one group is doing things, or this, these group of people with money or whoever, we can't support them. But of course, who knows if they can be stopped. But I'm curious, do you feel good and positive about the direction this whole psychedelic space is going, this ecosystem?
This is the idea I'm playing with a lot at the moment. If we can recognize that we are part of something way bigger and more important than us, then maybe we have a kind of interesting synthesis to start playing with.
The good news is I do believe in the end, at least maybe it's because I'm in this bubble of interviewing people like you. I do believe majority are in it for the greater good, for, this bigger mission of seeing system change and the world change, and hopefully some level of, spiritual expansion and what I would call healing, which I don't, again, I don't even like to use that word to, just assume that there's actually something wrong, but to really start to address these deeper roots. And Alexander, so I want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit more about your work and the book that's coming up and what you have coming out in the next 6 to 12 months. Like, what's happening with Breaking Convention and Rebel Wisdom?
Yeah, a few different things really, but people go to alexanderbeiner.com. You can find all of that.
Beautiful. So Rebel Wisdom's like done. You're letting go of it.
Yeah. We're letting go. We've it's just the right time, and kind of it's been a good, really beautiful kind of 5-year process. But we're both kind of moving in different directions, and the project itself just feels like it wants or needs to end.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Well, look at all that's about to rebirth or birth from that. Alexander, I'd actually love to bring you back on when your book is about to release, because I want to dive deeper into this. This is actually some of my favorite topics to talk about. And it is a very psychedelic, strange experience to be witnessing this. But, I have faith in whatever it is that needs to emerge. And hey, worst case scenario, if we just, extinct ourselves as a species, then what can we do? It is what it is, right? Like, I'm okay with that. But hopefully, I am just, all jokes aside, I actually love to bring light to really these dark topics, because, if we don't make fun of ourselves, like, what's the point of living, right? But I appreciate this book that you wrote. I appreciate you so much sharing this level of wisdom and topics that are so important for these changing times we're in. Thank you so much for the medicine that you bring to the world. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're feeling inspired, I'd appreciate it if you showed your love with a review. And check out my YouTube channel, where you can find the video version of this podcast. You can also head to bethaweinstein.com to learn more about me and grab my free business growth trainings. Remember, you carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times.